The night was dark, and the studio lights were blinding. Elvis Presley stood on the small, makeshift stage, his heart pounding in his chest. It had been 7 long years since he last performed in front of a live audience, and now, under the watchful eyes of a sea of fans and a live television crew, he was about to make a comeback. But this wasn't just any comeback. This was his last, best chance to prove to the world that he was still the king of rock and roll. Elvis had been feeling the pressure for months. His career had been in a slump, and his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, had come up with a plan to revive his fortunes. Parker wanted Elvis to do a Christmas special, singing holiday songs and trying to appeal to a broader, more mainstream audience, but Elvis knew that wasn't what he needed. He needed to connect with the younger generation, the ones who had been inspired by the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, the ones who saw him as a has-been. Thankfully, Bob Finkel, the producer assigned to the show, had a different vision. Finkel understood what the kids wanted, and he was determined to give Elvis a chance to show the world who he really was. He hired a young, innovative director named Steve Binder, who had a knack for creating something fresh and exciting. Binder saw Elvis not just as a fading star, but as a musical genius who had lost his way. He believed that the special could be Elvis's opportunity to strip away the Hollywood glitz and get back to his roots. Elvis and Binder hit it off immediately. They both shared a love for spontaneous, intuitive music, and Binder knew exactly how to bring out the best in Elvis. He came up with a plan for the special that was anything but conventional. The show would be a mix of performance and storytelling, with Elvis performing in a series of skits that would take the audience through his career. But the real magic would happen during the sit-down jam session, where Elvis would perform with his old friends, Scotty Moore and DJ Fontana, in a setting that felt more like a living room than a television set. The night of the taping, Elvis was a bundle of nerves. He had moved into his dressing room at the NBC studios a week earlier, working tirelessly to prepare for the special. He was determined to make this show a success, not just for himself, but for the fans who had stood by him through thick and thin. When he stepped onto the stage, dressed in a sleek black leather jumpsuit, the audience erupted in cheers. Elvis fed off their energy, and as he started to sing, he felt a surge of confidence he hadn't felt in years. The first few songs were a mix of old hits and new material, including a powerful rendition of Guitar Man. But the highlight of the night came during the sit-down jam session. Elvis, surrounded by his friends, played and sang with a passion and authenticity that had been missing from his performances for far too long. He joked with the audience, forgot lyrics, and improvised, creating a sense of intimacy that drew everyone in. The crowd was electrified, and Elvis was on fire. But the most unforgettable moment of the night came at the end, when Elvis performed a new song called "If I Can Dream." It was a message song, a plea for hope and understanding in a world that had become increasingly divided. Elvis's voice was raw and emotional, and as he sang the final lines, the audience was moved to tears. The performance was nothing short of magical, and it was clear to everyone in the room that Elvis was back. The next few weeks were a blur of excitement and anticipation. The special was edited and promoted, and on December 3, 1968, it aired on NBC. It was a resounding success, drawing in 42% of the viewing public, and becoming the most watched television program of the season. The reviews were overwhelmingly positive, and Elvis's career was on the rise once again. But the real victory was the feeling of renewal that Elvis felt. He was ready to tour again, ready to perform live, and ready to reclaim his place as the king of rock and roll. Elvis Presley's career hit a major milestone with the American sessions. These recordings marked the peak of his development as a vocalist and recording artist, thanks largely to the expertise of producer Chips Moman and his talented session musicians. They brought a level of sophistication to Elvis's music that had never been heard before. Instead of layering instruments one on top of the other, they seamlessly integrated strings, horns, and backing vocals into the arrangements. This made the songs feel richer and more complex, while Elvis's powerful vocals added a raw edge that kept them from sounding too polished. One of the standout tracks from these sessions was "Suspicious Minds." It became Elvis's most accomplished single, and perhaps the most moving recording of his career. The song's power was partly due to the unorthodox fade-out and coda added by producer Felton Jarvis, which mimicked Elvis's live performances. But even the original, undubbed version, recorded on the last night of the January session, was breathtaking. Elvis's voice alone conveyed a depth and maturity that showed he had finally found material and a setting that matched his talents. The success of the American sessions was immediate. The first single, In the Ghetto, was a smash hit in April 1969, reaching No. 3 on the pop charts and selling 1.2 million copies. This was Elvis's biggest hit since 1961. Suspicious Minds, released in August, did even better, hitting No. 1 and reigniting public interest in Elvis. This success continued with Don't Cry Daddy, which reached No. 6 in November and sold another 1.2 million copies. Although Kentucky Rain, released in 1970, didn't make the top 10, it was still praised by critics and concluded Elvis's most successful run since his Army days. Elvis's albums also started to gain traction. The soundtrack to his TV special reached No. 8 on the album charts, and From Elvis in Memphis, the first album from the American sessions, was a critical hit. Rolling Stone magazine, known for its thoughtful reviews, gave it a glowing write-up. This helped Elvis attract a new generation of fans and solidified his place in rock music history. Critics like Peter Guralnick, Grail Marcus, and Dave Marsh compared Elvis's new music to his groundbreaking work from the 1950s, reinforcing his status as the king of rock and roll. When Elvis returned to the studio in June 1970, he was eager to continue exploring a wide range of music. Working with another group of talented Nashville musicians, he recorded 35 songs over a week. These included gospel, blues, country, and pop, with a focus on ballads and older country tunes. The resulting album, Elvis Country, was released in January 1971. While the material was well received, it didn't match the commercial success of the American sessions. However, songs like You Don't Have to Say You Love Me still performed well, reaching No. 11 on the charts. Despite some disappointment from rock fans, Elvis's focus on ballads and country music helped him gain popularity among country audiences. Many country fans, who had grown up listening to early rock and roll, were receptive to his music. They saw Elvis as a bridge between their traditional country roots and the more contemporary sounds of rock and pop. This was a significant shift from the 1950s, when country purists often dismissed rock and roll as a corrupting influence. By the summer of 1969, Elvis was preparing for his return to live performances in Las Vegas. He was excited and determined to put on the best show possible. Instead of just playing his old hits or sticking to the new adult material, he decided to showcase the full spectrum of American music. This included pop, soul, country, gospel, rock, and blues. It was a bold move, especially given the increasingly fragmented music scene of the late 1960s, where artists were often trying to appeal to specific audiences by narrowing their styles. To make this vision a reality, Elvis assembled a top-notch band and vocal groups. He chose James Burton, a respected guitarist, to lead the band and help select the other musicians. He also added the Imperials, a white male gospel quartet, and the Sweet Inspirations, a black female quartet, to give his music the right blend of gospel and soul. Elvis was hands-on during rehearsals, working tirelessly to perfect the sound and the repertoire. He encouraged the musicians to experiment and incorporate their own ideas, which only enhanced the final product. Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, worked hard to promote the Las Vegas shows. He organized billboards, posters, and ads, and arranged for RCA to provide promotional materials. He also secured interviews and feature stories in the press, and compiled an impressive guest list for the opening night. When the show opened on July 31st, the showroom was packed with celebrities and VIP. Elvis, despite his nerves, delivered an electrifying performance that had the audience on their feet from the start. He combined hits old and new, and his physical energy was as impressive as his vocal prowess. The highlight was Suspicious Minds, which became his new signature song. Elvis's return to live performances was a triumph. He not only reclaimed his status as a top performer, but also showed that he could still connect with a live audience in a way that few other artists could. His Las Vegas shows were a testament to his enduring talent and his ability to adapt and evolve, while staying true to his roots. Elvis's success in Las Vegas during the summer of 1969 was a turning point. His energy and dedication on that first night set the tone for the entire engagement. As the days went by, Elvis became even more relaxed and high-spirited. The shows were so good that RCA began recording them to create a live album. This would help Elvis fulfill his contract with the label and give fans who couldn't make it to Vegas a taste of the magic. Critics raved about the shows, and both Elvis and his manager, Colonel Parker, were thrilled with the outcome. After the opening night, Parker even shed tears and hugged Elvis, a rare and emotional moment for both of them. Capitalizing on this success, Parker quickly negotiated a new contract with the International Hotel. Elvis would perform 2 engagements a year for the next 5 years, earning $500,000 for each 4-week gig. The contract also included a clause that would increase his pay if any other performer got a better deal. This ensured that Elvis would remain the highest-paid headliner in Las Vegas. During the early 1970s, Elvis's Vegas shows became legendary. He set attendance records and developed a unique repertoire that included covers of contemporary hits like Bridge Over Troubled Water and You Gave Me a Mountain. One of the highlights was his powerful cover of An American Trilogy, a medley that blended Dixie, Battle Hymn of the Republic, and All My Trials. This song reflected Elvis's complex musical background and his deep connection to American culture. His concerts became a unifying ritual, as if Elvis, through his charisma, could heal the divisions in America. Elvis continued to perform many of his old songs, including blues and rockers like Tiger Man and Polk Salad Annie. These songs often featured karate-inspired choreography, which added a unique flair to his performances. However, Elvis's tastes also leaned toward sentimental and inspirational songs, which came to dominate his shows. Each concert ended with Can't Help Falling in Love, and Elvis's quick exit from the stage. Elvis's Vegas show was as much a visual spectacle as it was a musical one. He worked closely with Bill Ballou, a Hollywood costumer, to design elaborate costumes. These costumes, adorned with rhinestones and featuring high collars, capes, and wide jewel-encrusted belts, made Elvis look almost supernatural. They were a perfect expression of his Southern, working-class, and evangelical roots, mixed with a New Age spiritualism and a love for excess. Elvis's stage presence was also a key part of the show. He would strut and gyrate across the stage, often stopping to distribute kisses, scarves, and sweat-drenched handkerchiefs to women in the front rows. In 1971, he added a new opening to his show, appearing to the dramatic music of Richard Strauss's Also Sprach Zarathustra, the theme from 2001, A Space Odyssey. These touches made Elvis's show stand out and influenced other entertainers to create more opulent and extravagant performances. While some critics and younger fans were disappointed by the glitz and mainstream appeal of Elvis's Vegas shows, they were incredibly popular with the majority of his audience. Many of his fans were working class and evangelical, and they appreciated Elvis's religiosity and his patriotic and spiritual themes. They were also grateful for the way Elvis connected with his fans, often evoking nostalgia and sentimentality through his music and performances. Elvis's success in Las Vegas inspired Parker to arrange more tours. In 1970, Elvis performed at Houston's Astrodome, drawing a record crowd of 43,614 people. This success led to a series of concerts across the country, including a tour of the Midwest and Northeast in 1971. In June 1972, Elvis played 3 concerts at New York's Madison Square Garden, a venue he had not performed at since the 1950s. The shows were a huge success, and the live album recorded from one of the performances reached No. 11 on the charts. Parker also arranged for documentaries about Elvis to be filmed. Elvis, That's the Way It Is, followed Presley as he prepared for his 1970 Vegas engagement, and Elvis on Tour focused on his 1972 spring tour. These documentaries gave fans a behind-the-scenes look at Elvis's life and performances, further cementing his status as a musical icon. Parker's biggest coup was the Aloha from Hawaii special. In January 1973, Elvis performed a concert in Hawaii that was broadcast via satellite to a worldwide audience of 1.5 billion viewers. NBC paid Elvis $900,000 for the performance, and the show was a massive success. It drew the highest ratings in Japan's history, and when broadcast in the United States, It was watched by 57% of the viewing public. This event confirmed Elvis's reputation as the world's preeminent superstar. Elvis's performances in Las Vegas and on tour during the early 1970s were a testament to his enduring appeal and his ability to connect with a diverse audience. Despite the criticism from some quarters, Elvis remained a beloved figure, and his shows continued to draw huge crowds and critical acclaim. Elvis Presley's comeback in 1968 with the Singer Special was a huge success. It brought him back into the spotlight and showed the world that he was still a powerful musical force. This resurgence not only restored his visibility, but also expanded his fan base to include people of all ages and backgrounds. Young and old, Americans and people from around the world all found something to love about Elvis. For some, he was the king of rock and roll, a symbol of rebellion and energy. For others, he represented American values and traditions, a reminder of the opportunities that the country offered. However, one group that gradually disappeared from his audience was African American. In the 1950s, many black fans had supported Elvis, appreciating his respect for gospel, soul, and R&B. But as the civil rights movement gained momentum and racial tensions rose, many African Americans turned away from white artists, including Elvis. They felt that his music, while influenced by black culture, was part of a broader pattern of cultural appropriation. This was a sad irony, as Elvis had always been genuine in his admiration for black music and artists. In January 1971, Elvis's status as a mainstream icon was solidified when he was named one of the nation's 10 Outstanding Young Men of the Year by the Junior Chamber of Commerce. The award was a significant honor, recognizing his philanthropy, character, and loyalty. Elvis was thrilled, especially since the ceremony was in his hometown of Memphis. He worked hard on his acceptance speech, showing drafts to his wife, Priscilla, and seeking her advice. At the event, he spoke about his humble beginnings and how every dream he had ever had came true many times over. It was a touching moment, and he seemed genuinely moved. But behind the scenes, Elvis's life was far from perfect. His marriage to Priscilla was in trouble. After the birth of their daughter, Lisa Marie, Elvis became distant, refusing to have intimate relations with Priscilla. This strained their relationship, and things worsened when he returned to performing. The constant presence of other people, including other women, made it hard for Priscilla to connect with him. She even took up karate, hoping it might help, but it didn't. She began to feel neglected and started her own romantic relationships, including one with Mike Stone, a karate champion. Elvis, on the other hand, embraced the life of a sex symbol. He had numerous girlfriends, and often had them flown to his shows. This behavior was widely reported in the media, and when asked about his fun without Priscilla, he made it clear that he saw their marriage as open. However, he still expected Priscilla to be faithful and raise their daughter. This double standard was a source of tension, and in December 1971, Priscilla told Elvis she wanted a divorce. She was tired of being ignored and wanted to pursue her own happiness. Elvis was devastated when Priscilla announced her decision, and even more upset when she revealed her relationship with Mike Stone. He became paranoid and even considered having Stone killed, though he eventually backed down. The breakup of his marriage deeply affected Elvis, and his mood became increasingly melancholic. This was evident in his music, where he gravitated towards sad, introspective ballads. Even when he recorded a hit like Burning Love, he remained focused on his personal struggles. Despite his public success, Elvis was dealing with significant personal issues. His marriage, health, and mental state were all in decline, and these problems would continue to plague him in the years to come. But for a while, the accolades and the love from his fans allowed him to keep performing and to maintain his status as a living legend. Elvis Presley's life after his divorce from Priscilla was a mix of high points and low points. His friends and family often blamed the divorce for his downbeat state of mind, but there was another significant factor at play: his continued abuse of prescription drugs. Despite his rigorous preparations for performances, like the Singer Special and his first Vegas engagement, Elvis never stopped taking amphetamines and sleeping pills. However, when something exciting was on the horizon, like a show at Madison Square Garden or the Hawaii Special, he would limit his drug use. This would impress his friends and make them less likely to question his habits. Joe Esposito, one of his closest friends, explained, "We'd all seen him suddenly stop drugs, so there was always hope that one day he would clean up for good." But things changed when Elvis's performances in Vegas and on tour became routine. Without new challenges to keep him focused, his drug use increased. He found it easier to get drugs in Las Vegas and Los Angeles, where doctors were more willing to cater to the whims of big stars. This made it hard for his regular doctor in Memphis, Dr. George Nishapoulos, to keep track of his drug intake or limit the harmful side effects. By 1973, Elvis had become addicted to Demerol, a powerful synthetic opiate, and was regularly taking large quantities of sleeping pills and other strong drugs. He even started using cocaine, which he claimed helped counteract the effects of the other drugs and gave him more energy. Despite this, Elvis continued to rationalize his drug use, telling a girlfriend, "I need it." As his drug use increased, he became more defensive and angry when his father, Vernon, or members of his entourage brought up the subject. Elvis's drug abuse not only increased the risk of addiction and overdose, but also contributed to his mental health issues. Some biographers suggest that Elvis's mother, Gladys, suffered from depression, and he may have inherited a predisposition to it. Whether or not this is true, Elvis's lifestyle and drug use made his mental health worse. The drugs made him more susceptible to depression and made it harder for him to cope. His drug use also caused physical health problems. His intake of downers led to severe intestinal issues, liver damage, and bloating. These problems forced him to cancel performances and enter the hospital for treatment. In October 1973, Elvis was rushed to a Memphis hospital in a semi-comatose state. His addiction to Demerol was revealed, and he was treated with methadone, a drug used to help heroin addicts. For a while, he remained relatively sober, but by the fall of 1974, he had returned to his old habits. Around this time, Elvis met Linda Thompson, a young beauty queen from Memphis. She provided the kind of attention and care that lifted his spirits. She nursed him back to health after his near overdose and became a steady presence in his life. For a few years, she was a stabilizing force, but as Elvis's drug use increased, she became more worried and eventually left him in November 1976. Soon after, Elvis met Ginger Alden, a young and self-centered 19-year-old. Unlike Linda, Ginger was less accommodating and more independent. She played hard to get and used her relationship with Elvis to bring her family into his inner circle. This made her unpopular with Elvis's friends, who saw her as a gold digger. Despite their concerns, Elvis proposed to her in January 1977, and they became engaged. However, Ginger's independence often sent Elvis into emotional turmoil, as he struggled to prove his virility and maintain a relationship with a much younger woman. During this period, Elvis also began to fear for his safety. He was deeply affected by the assassinations and kidnappings of the late 1960s and early 1970s. In August 1970, Elvis received a threatening call about a planned attack during a Las Vegas performance. Although nothing came of the threat, it led him to transform his entourage into a security detail. He started carrying guns and giving them to friends and relatives as gifts. He also became close with John O'Grady, a former narcotics agent, who encouraged him to identify with law enforcement. Elvis's interest in police work grew into a fixation. In the fall of 1970, he became obsessed with getting an official badge from the Federal Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. This led him to Washington, D.C., where he met President Nixon, thanks to a chance encounter with Senator George Murphy on a plane. During the meeting, Elvis, dressed in a flamboyant Edwardian suit, presented himself as someone who could influence the counterculture and help restore respect for America. He suggested that he could wean young people away from anti-American influences and offered to work as a federal agent at large. Nixon, moved by Elvis's sincerity, instructed an aide to give him the badge. Elvis's appeal to Nixon was a mix of genuine belief and a desire to get the badge. He saw himself as someone who could bridge the gap between the establishment and the counterculture. His fears for his safety and his desire to be a positive influence on America's youth were genuine, even if his methods and motivations were sometimes questionable. Elvis's returned to his old ways. and his increasing drug use strained his relationships. His entourage, which had returned to help him, quickly fell back into a pattern of jealousy and backstabbing. Elvis's capricious favoritism and the brown-nosing it inspired made the situation even worse. Despite the challenges, Elvis continued to perform and try to maintain his image as the king of rock and roll, but his personal struggles were taking a toll. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, found himself surrounded by a world that was changing. Many of his old friends, who had been with him since the 1950s, seemed to be more interested in his money and fame than in him. Drugs clouded his judgment, and he started to believe that everyone around him was just using him. This made him treat his friends more harshly, always reminding them who was the boss. Lamar Fike, one of his closest friends, said Elvis got really mean in the early 1970s. Elvis's behavior became more unpredictable and sometimes cruel. He would boast and belittle his friends, and his dissatisfaction with his life and his boredom contributed to his harsh treatment of them. Some of his old friends, like Fike and Jerry Schilling, became frustrated and left to find their own paths. They were replaced by younger men, including his wife's sons, who were more like employees than friends. This only made Elvis more paranoid about loyalty. Security became a big issue for Elvis. He used his connections to get himself and his security detail permission to carry concealed weapons. He often showed off these guns in his hotel suite, sometimes scaring or nearly hurting people. Despite these accidents, Elvis continued to fire guns at will, even shooting at TV and chandeliers. One time he shot up a hotel toilet, which made people laugh but also showed how reckless he was. Elvis's security detail, including Red West, often got into trouble. They would beat up people trying to get into Elvis's suite, leading to lawsuits and bad publicity. Elvis, however, encouraged this behavior. He had taught them karate and often showed off his own skills, even though some of the guys were better than he was. Elvis made them believe that they were always under threat, and they responded by being aggressive. Maintaining this entourage was very expensive. Elvis's father, Vernon, often warned him about his spending, but Elvis didn't listen. He was earning over $5 million a year, and felt he could buy anything he wanted. He bought expensive cars, motorcycles, weapons, and clothes. He even redecorated Graceland, adding a Polynesian-themed room called the Jungle Room, which showed his unique taste. Elvis also bought several airplanes, including a decommissioned airliner he named the Lisa Marie. He would fly to different cities on a whim, often to impress a new girlfriend. His spending wasn't just on himself. He was also very generous. He bought jewelry, guns, and cars for his family, friends, and even strangers. During one shopping spree, he bought 14 Cadillacs and gave them away as gifts, including one to a woman who was just window shopping. Elvis rationalized his spending by saying he was making more money. But his father, Vernon, worried about bankruptcy and tried to get Elvis to control his spending. Elvis's drug use and his sense of self-importance made it hard for Vernon to influence him. Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, was also in debt and couldn't advise him to be thrifty. With Priscilla, his ex-wife, no longer around to help, Elvis was surrounded by people who benefited from his generosity. Elvis's spending was partly a way to enjoy his wealth and share it with others, like in the TV show The Millionaire. He also believed his wealth could disappear quickly, so he wanted to enjoy it while he could. However, his spending became compulsive and tied him to a lifestyle that left him with fewer career options. His drug use and his need to control his entourage made his behavior more erratic. In 1973, Elvis tried to record new music at Stax Studios in Memphis. The first session was a disaster. Elvis was late, stoned, and uninterested. The songs were bad, and Elvis didn't even try with most of them. He spent more time showing off karate moves and telling wild stories. The second session in December was better. Elvis was sober and more productive, but the songs didn't do well commercially. Despite his popularity as a live performer, his new music was selling less. RCA, Elvis's record label, convinced Colonel Parker to let them release greatest hits packages. This was a mistake. While the reissues sold well, they hurt the sales of Elvis's new music. The public started to see Elvis as an oldies act, and his new albums struggled to find an audience. Elvis's life was a mix of fame, fortune, and growing isolation. His relationships were strained, his health was declining, and his career was facing new challenges. Despite his success, he was struggling to find his way in a changing world. Elvis Presley's life in the 1970s was a stark contrast to his earlier days as the king of rock and roll. By this time, his drug abuse and health problems had taken a severe toll, leaving him unable to record new music or perform with the same vigor that made him famous. In March 1975, a recording session in Los Angeles produced only 10 songs, and even the best of them, Trouble, sold just 200,000 copies. This was a far cry from his earlier hits that had sold millions. In an effort to inspire him, Elvis's manager, Felton Jarvis, brought RCA Mobile Recording Unit to Graceland, Elvis's mansion in Memphis. The hope was that recording in a familiar environment would spark his creativity. However, the session in February 1976, held in the recently redecorated Jungle Room, was disappointing. Elvis was often distracted or high on drugs, and when he was sober, he wasted time showing off his collection of police badges or lecturing on New Age mysticism. He would retreat to his bedroom for hours, listening to gospel music or watching TV, or even plotting to kill drug dealers in Memphis. The session produced only 12 songs, and Elvis's lack of focus and erratic behavior made it clear that he was struggling. Jarvis tried again in October 1976, setting up another session at Graceland. This time, Elvis was even more distracted. He spent most of the time in his bedroom, and at one point, even brandished a submachine gun. When a shipment of new motorcycles arrived, he abruptly stopped recording to go for a ride. On the second night, Elvis apologized to the musicians and canceled the session, realizing he couldn't deliver. As his record sales declined, Elvis became increasingly dependent on live performances. In 1974, he toured extensively, playing shows across the country and earning about $4 million. His Las Vegas engagements and a gig in Lake Tahoe brought in less, around $700,000. These concerts were not just a source of income, but also a way for Elvis to feel the adoration of his fans, which was crucial for his self-esteem. However, his performances began to receive negative reviews, and his fans' unwavering support became a double-edged sword. Their loyalty meant that no matter how poor his performances, they would still cheer wildly. This became a crutch, allowing Elvis to avoid taking risks and trying new material. Elvis's concerts took on a ritualistic quality, with fans attending dozens of shows to see their hero. For many, it was like a religious experience, and this bond between Elvis and his fans laid the groundwork for the posthumous devotion that would follow his death. However, this devotion also meant that Elvis felt pressured to stick with his old hits and familiar routine. When he tried to introduce new songs and the audience's response was lukewarm, he quickly reverted to his tried and true material. He chose safe, well-known hits over innovation, fearing that he might alienate his loyal fan base. Elvis's relationship with his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, was often strained. In September 1973, during a Las Vegas performance, Elvis publicly criticized the Hilton Hotel's management, leading to a heated argument with Parker. Elvis, influenced by drugs, was behaving erratically, and his performances were suffering. Parker's warnings about his behavior fell on deaf ears until Elvis fired him. However, the financial consequences of breaking with Parker were too steep, and after 2 weeks of negotiations, Elvis apologized and the Colonel returned. Another source of tension was Parker's refusal to allow Elvis to tour Europe. Offers for European tours had been coming in since the late 1950s, but Parker always vetoed them, citing logistical difficulties and better financial opportunities in the U.S. Some fans speculated that Parker, rumored to be an illegal immigrant, was avoiding potential legal issues. However, Elvis's own reluctance to travel abroad, fearing new security measures that might interfere with his drug use, was likely the real reason. One of the biggest missed opportunities was the chance to co-star with Barbra Streisand, and in the remake of A Star is Born. Elvis was initially excited about the project, seeing it as a chance to reinvent himself. However, Parker's demands for more money and control led to the offer being withdrawn, and Chris Christopherson was cast instead. This decision was a significant blow to Elvis, who sank deeper into depression without a new challenge. By 1975, Even Elvis's live performances were becoming problematic. After a hospitalization in 1973, he seemed to be on the mend, but by the middle of 1974, his behavior onstage was unpredictable. He would perform karate routines between songs, and sometimes deliver incoherent monologues. His health continued to decline, and he often forgot lyrics, relying on cheat sheets provided by his friend Charlie Hodge. His voice became weak, and his stage patter was increasingly bizarre. Some shows were cut short due to his poor condition, and the frequent cancellations began to damage his reputation for professionalism. Elvis's drug abuse and health issues led to multiple hospitalizations. In January 1975, he was admitted to a hospital in Memphis after a near overdose. Dr. George Nishapoulos, known as Dr. Nick, tried to control Elvis's drug intake, but Elvis's network of compliant doctors made it difficult. To prevent further issues, Dr. Nick established a new routine, with nurses visiting Graceland daily to dispense precise doses of medication. He also encouraged Elvis to take up racquetball, and a court was built at Graceland. Despite these efforts, Elvis's decline was evident. His performances, once electrifying, were now marred by his poor health and drug use. His fans continued to support him, but the king of rock and roll was losing his crown, and the road ahead was filled with challenges. Elvis Presley's journey was a roller coaster of fame, fortune, and struggle. Despite his incredible talent and the adoration of millions, he couldn't escape the demons that plagued him. His battle with drug addiction, exacerbated by the pressures of celebrity and the relentless expectations of his fans, took a heavy toll on his health and well-being. As the 1970s wore on, Elvis's performances became increasingly inconsistent. He would have moments of brilliance where his charisma and voice shone through, but these were often overshadowed by shows where he appeared out of shape, forgetful, and disconnected. Critics began to take notice, and their reviews became harsher. Even the local press, which had once been forgiving, started to voice their concerns. Elvis's weight gain and erratic behavior on stage were hard to ignore. The tabloids, always hungry for scandal, pounced on these issues. Stories about Elvis's drug use and bizarre behavior became common, and by 1974, a National Enquirer cover story titled "Elvis at 40 Paunchy, Depressed and Living in Fear," deeply troubled him. The article, filled with unflattering photos and quotes from critics, hit close to home. It was a painful reminder that the world was watching, and not always with compassion. Elvis's isolation at Graceland grew as he became more paranoid and depressed. He spent most of his time in his bedroom, often with one of his girlfriends, and only a few trusted people, like Billy Smith and Dr. Nishapoulos, had access to him. He installed surveillance cameras to monitor the activities of his entourage, who he increasingly distrusted. Vernon, his father, did little to ease his fears, and in 1976, Elvis fired some of his longtime friends and bodyguards, including Red West and Sonny West, over concerns about their loyalty and their attempts to confront him about his drug use. The firing of his old friends only deepened Elvis's sense of betrayal. When he learned that Red and Sonny were planning to write a book exposing his troubles, he offered them money to stop, but they refused. The book, Elvis, What Happened, was published in August 1977, just as Elvis was about to embark on a new tour. The publicity surrounding the book made Elvis nervous, and he considered admitting his problems during a concert if the audience turned hostile. It was a significant step, one that showed he was finally ready to face the truth, but Elvis never got the chance. On August 16, 1977, the day he was supposed to leave for a show in Portland, Maine, Elvis was found dead in his bathroom at Graceland. He was only 42 years old. The official cause of death was heart failure, but it was later revealed that a toxic mix of drugs in his system was the true culprit. At the time of his death, Elvis had no fewer than 14 different drugs in his body, many at dangerous levels. Elvis's passing was a shock to the world. His fans, who had stood by him through thick and thin, were devastated. For years, Elvis had been a larger-than-life figure, a symbol of rock and roll and American culture. But the man behind the legend was far more complex and troubled than anyone realized. His struggles with addiction and the pressure of fame ultimately led to his downfall. In the end, Elvis's story is a cautionary tale about the price of fame and the importance of seeking help when facing personal struggles. Despite his flaws, Elvis Presley remains an icon, a reminder of the power of music and the human spirit. His legacy lives on, not just in his music, but in the lessons his life teaches us about the importance of authenticity and the need to take care of ourselves, even when the world is watching.